Hello everyone, I'm Awais Rashid. I am Director of the UK's National Research Centre on Privacy, Harm Reduction and Adversarial Influence Online. I'm also a Professor at the University of Bristol, and today, together with my colleague Partha Chowdhury, I'm going to talk to you about our work on building a privacy testbed. Of course, building a testbed is not an endeavor that just two people can do. So a number of other researchers and PhD students have been involved in the work, and they're all listed here by way of acknowledgement. So the question that we need to start from is as to why build a privacy testbed. And being at an event such as PEPR, it's a bit like preaching to the choir. But we hear about the problems with software applications or software-based systems with regards to privacy on a regular basis. Whether it is in the kind of public discourse, such as in newspapers talking about Amazon's Ring logging every doorbell, press, and app action, to, for example, smart home applications potentially spying or collecting data about their users, as well as there's this kind of wonderful picture from one of the keynotes at Soups a few years ago, which talked about the fact how smartphones actually know very much about your apps, know very much about where you have been, and can build a pretty much perfect map of Manhattan. And it has been very much to the fore as well in the debates around track and trace in the face of the pandemic. What kind of information is being collected, what kind of metadata is being used on the basis of that collection, and whether that leads to privacy leakage. So why a privacy testbed? There are many potential users of such a testbed. So if you are an app developer, okay, you may want to get assurance about particular properties. Okay, so with regards to compliance with regulations such as GDPR or COPPA or HIPAA, you may want to test if you are making assertions that you are not leaking particular types of data, that is actually true. You may care for your users, and you may also want to give them assurance that what you're really doing is what you're claiming. But also, many apps are built through third-party libraries and APIs, including ad networks and things like that. And how do you know what information or what metadata is actually going to these third-party apps and libraries? And if you've configured them, have you configured them correctly to constrain the data that is being shared? There is, of course, regulators, who are interested in checking claims about data and information storage and flows from a compliance perspective. So if someone is claiming that they have done something and they comply with a particular regulation, is that actually the case? And then, of course, we are researchers. We want to undertake rigorous evaluation of different types of applications under experimental conditions, but we also want to be able to compare and contrast. We want to be able to generate and share our data sets so that people can compare against a common reference platform. But equally, journalists, citizens' rights groups, they may be interested in undertaking similar evaluations and generating and sharing data sets from these evaluations. And last but not least, even end users can be a potential user of such a privacy testbed. And I know it's a kind of vision into the future, because at the moment our focus primarily has been on kind of researchers and potentially app developers and regulators. But really, if you're an end user and you are downloading an application, you want to see, does it do what it says on the tin? Okay, so if it has a privacy policy, is it actually doing the things that it claims in its privacy policy? If it has got a data protection impact assessment, is it actually doing those things? Or, privacy labels that are quite now common on the Apple App Store, but also will come in on Google, Android and Google Play Store as well. If they're making certain claims, how do you know that they're actually true? Can you go and drop that app into a testbed and be able to get some assurance about those properties from an independent perspective? So here is our case in point, right? So end-to-end encryption messaging applications, so things like Signal, WhatsApp, and so on. And there is this eternal debate between data and metadata. And it all depends on, what the threat model is. And in this case, for example, these messaging apps would actually encrypt the contents of the message in itself, but there may be metadata that might be flowing alongside, which it does, depending on, for example, WhatsApp would know that you talked to someone at a particular point in time. They would not know exactly what you discussed in that particular point in time. We deployed actually, some of these apps in our prototype testbed. So, this is an analysis of signal where you can see that there are different IPs being contacted as part of the signal operation setup. Now, I'm not saying there's anything illegitimate going on, but depending on jurisdiction and depending on regulatory compliance, there may be potential issues here. For example, if there are particular services being contacted around a particular geographic area. But on the reverse side, if you are a privacy activist, you may have concerns about the data that is being collected about you.
Hi, I am Partha. So we did an internal consultation between the referent researchers before we started building on this testbed. And so we kind of thought that there would be some expert users and there would be non-expert users as well. And the expert users would perhaps want to run more advanced features on the testbed. Nevertheless, there would be a sharing of the deployment specs between the expert users and the non-expert users for the testbed. Now, what was our high-level design considerations for the testbed? So we would want to have a layer of orchestration or of deployment where we would be able to deploy many VMs on the testbed, and the networking would emulate the real-world proxies and the routers that any traffic goes through, which would eventually facilitate some kind of data logging and analysis on the log data. At the orchestration layer, somebody would be able to come in and deploy their apps and see how they play out with all the other layers below them. So how did we implement the testbed? So once we implemented the testbed, we had the virtualization was done by a kernel-based virtual machine called KVM that allows it to function like a hypervisor, which was deployed inside a Ubuntu desktop virtual machine. There was a command line interface tool which was built using Rust, and that models around Docker Compose. So you have KVM Compose up and down to turn on the testbed and tear down the testbed. And the networking was provided using OVS switches, and that was linked up to a SDN controller as Floodlight to enable more advanced network management. So what are the challenges and lessons we learned from the testbed? The testbed actually facilitates the animation of security protocols and their automated testing, their automated correctness proof. Now, the moment we simulate a protocol and test it for its correctness, there will be assumptions we will make. For example, some of the applications are tied to cloud services. So how do we replicate them on the testbed? And the other one was that it was not just a plug and play. So, for example, the E2E apps that require a SIM validation, we can still emulate that using eSIMs, but we still need custom scripts to simulate user interaction in ADB. The other one was using playbooks. Now, playbooks sometimes can give problems if for a comma, or it is difficult to validate the transitions when one command is executed before the next command starts. So the idea was to have a minimal set of playbooks and then have a logging file to see if all the... So what are our future plans with the testbed? So as we discussed a few minutes back that we had an internal discussion, now we want to scale that up and have a formalized focus groups with wider testbed users. Why we want to do it? We want to evolve more scenarios. We want to evolve their expectations in terms of usability. And we would like to invite members from this audience to be part of that focus group. In terms of future implementation priorities, say we want to scale up in terms of deployment of VMs. Say, for example, we want to deploy thousands of virtual machines on the testbed. Connecting with other testbeds. Now, here we want to evolve potential data exchange mechanisms as well, that we can get data from their end, test it in our testbed and give them out for analysis. Usability is very important for us. Nevertheless, testbeds of such nature have their own complexities. So perhaps we won't be able to be at a stage where, we can just go in and deploy an app without with minimal mouse clicks, but at the same time, we would want to see how we can share between the expert users and the non-expert users. We would like to integrate additional analysis tools in the testbed, for example, see what's going into the TLS packets. So these are some of the plans we have with respect to the testbed. And if somebody is interested, they can contact us here. Thank you so much.